Starting at a new school as a junior is never easy, especially when you don't know a single soul. At Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania, friendships were already formed, leaving little room for an outsider like me. The hardest part? Lunch. Juniors weren't allowed to leave campus, which meant I had to face the cafeteria alone. I dreaded it. Walking in with my tray, I scanned the room, looking for an empty table. There wasn't one. Every single seat was taken, except for one table in the far corner, occupied by 2 students. It was my only option. I hesitated before walking over. "Mind if I sit here?" I asked. The 2 boys exchanged glances before one of them shrugged. "Yeah, sure." Up close, I realized they were identical twins. Their names were Antonio and Bruno. They seemed normal enough, friendly even. We talked throughout lunch, and by the end of it, they invited me to hang out after school. I had no other friends, so I said yes. That night, Bruno texted me, telling me to meet them at a spot near the local cemetery. He said there was a hidden lake in the woods nearby that they wanted to show me. The idea of meeting 2 near strangers in the woods at night should have raised red flags, but I was too eager to make friends to care. At 9 p.m., I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my skin as I made my way down the dimly lit road. My phone buzzed, Bruno confirming I was still coming. I replied with a simple, "Yeah," and kept walking. The cemetery came into view, its iron gates casting long, jagged shadows across the pavement. I hesitated before stepping onto the dirt path. As I entered the woods, the air felt heavier, the silence unsettling. My phone screen glowed in the dark as I followed the location they sent. "Bruno?" I called out. No answer, just the sound of my own breathing. Then, footsteps. Soft at first, then picking up speed. I stopped. The footsteps didn't, they were getting closer. "All right, if you're trying to scare me, it's not working," I said, forcing a chuckle. Silence. Then, before I could react, sharp nails dug into my neck from behind. A hand clamped down, cutting off my air. My body tensed in shock as a familiar voice growled, "Grab him!" Panic surged through me. Adrenaline took over. I twisted, breaking free from their grasp, and ran. Branches whipped against my face, but I didn't stop. I could hear them chasing me, their footsteps pounding against the forest floor. But I was faster. I sprinted straight home and burst through the door, gasping for air. My parents turned to me, alarmed. I told them everything. The next day, we took my story, along with the text messages, to the school. Antonio and Bruno were expelled. My parents made me block their numbers. I didn't argue. For a while, nothing happened. But about a week later, I woke up freezing. The air in my room was ice cold, and a strange sound filled the space. A soft, whistling breeze. My heart skipped a beat. My window was open. I sat up, staring at the dark void beyond the glass. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, but just below my window was a ledge my dad had always said could be used for emergencies. Had someone climbed up? I swallowed hard and crept to my parents' room. My mom stirred as I whispered, "Did you open my window?" She blinked, confused. "No. Why?" A deep sense of dread settled over me. Someone did. She shook my dad awake. Half asleep, he groaned. "You probably left it open," but I knew better. Frustrated, I walked back to my room and stopped. My door had been wide open when I left. Now, it was only halfway shut. A slow, creeping terror crawled up my spine. I inched forward, pushing the door open just a sliver, just enough to see behind it. Someone was standing there. I barely had time to process it before my door slammed shut. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life. My dad bolted out of his room as I stumbled backward, shouting, "Someone's in my room!" He charged in, flicking the light on just in time to see a leg disappearing out the window. He sprinted downstairs, throwing the front door open in an attempt to chase them down. But whoever it was had already vanished into the night. The police arrived shortly after. We told them everything, from the attack in the woods to the expulsion to the open window. But without proof, there was nothing they could do. That night, we locked every door and window. My dad installed security cameras the next day. For months, I slept with one eye open, but nothing ever happened again. Looking back, I don't know what I was thinking, agreeing to meet them in the woods. I should have known the moment I sat at that lunch table. Some people don't want to be your friend. They want something else, something much worse. It was my freshman year of high school back in 2007. Gym class was my last period of the day, and on this particular afternoon, a vicious storm raged outside. We had a substitute teacher, an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with graying hair and a demeanor that seemed a little too observant. When he took attendance, his eyes lingered on me for just a moment too long. I brushed it off, though something about it felt off. I had always been told I looked older than my age, but the way he studied me made me uncomfortable. After taking roll, the sub told us to get into our volleyball teams, then disappeared into the hallway by the locker rooms. He was gone for nearly the entire period. 40 minutes passed, the class ended, and we all headed for the locker rooms to change and go home. I reached my locker and spun the combination as I had done 100 times before, but this time it wouldn't open. I tried again and again. The dial clicked, but the latch wouldn't budge. Frustrated, I walked out to find the sub and let him know I needed my combination. He nodded, told me to wait, then disappeared again. When he finally returned, he had a small notebook open to a specific page. Without a word, he motioned for me to follow him. I expected him to hand me the code and wait outside, but instead, he stepped inside the girls' locker room with me. I hesitated. By this point, the locker room was almost empty, except for one girl finishing up at the far end. The sub walked with me to my locker, glanced at the notebook, and spun the combination himself. It didn't work. He laughed. I forced myself to chuckle along, but something about the way he looked at me made my stomach churn. "It's fine," I said. "I'll just grab my things later." He ignored me and tried again. Still nothing. His laughter grew softer, but it didn't feel like he was laughing at the situation anymore. It felt like he was laughing at me. Then, without warning, he placed his hand on my shoulder. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice eerily calm. I nodded stiffly, staring at the locker, trying to act like I wasn't uncomfortable. But as he spun the dial again, I felt his hand inch lower, from my shoulder to my upper back to my lower back. I tensed. I stepped away quickly, grabbing my bag. "It's okay, I have to catch my bus." He turned back to the locker, spun the dial once more, and this time it clicked open. He smiled and walked away without another word. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When I heard the locker room door close behind him, I rushed to change, desperate to leave. Then the lights went out. I froze. For a moment, I stood in the pitch-black locker room, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The only light came from a small rectangular window near the ceiling, casting a faint glow on the tiled floor. I yanked up my pants, shoved everything into my bag, and swung my backpack over my shoulder. I wasn't about to stick around to find out what was going on. I made my way toward the back exit, the door that led directly outside. But as I neared the end of the aisle of lockers, I had to glance to my right to make sure the path was clear. That's when I saw him. The substitute was standing at the far end of the lockers, his face partially hidden by the shadows, but I could see just enough. He was peeking at me, watching me. My breath caught in my throat. Then he stepped forward. I bolted. "Wait, wait!" he called after me. "It's not what it looks like." I didn't stop. I slammed through the exit door and ran out into the pouring rain, past the edge of the school grounds and all the way home. By the time I reached my front door, drenched and shivering, my mind finally pieced everything together. He had changed my locker combination. He had done it on purpose to get me alone. And when he cut the lights, I didn't want to think about what he had planned next. I never told anyone, not my parents, not my friends, not a soul. I was too embarrassed, too shaken. Even now, looking back, I wonder, if I hadn't run, if I had hesitated just a second longer, what would have happened in that dark, empty locker room? I'm glad I never found out. Back in high school, I was in the band. Not because I had a passion for it, but because it was either that, chorus, or kustra, whatever that was. I figured band was my best option. Our band teacher, Mr. Nicholson, had an easy grading system. As long as you showed up for class and attended your weekly lessons, you got an A. Unfortunately, towards the end of the quarter, I had missed 2 lessons. That meant my grade had dropped to a B. I wasn't about to let that slide. So, after class one day, I asked Mr. Nicholson if I could make them up. He seemed reluctant at first, but after a pause, he told me I could come in during my lunch period to practice in one of the basement storage rooms. It was an easy deal. Show up, mess around on my saxophone, and get my A. I was more than happy to take it because, realistically, I wasn't planning to practice. I'd probably just play games on my phone the whole time. The next day, I showed up to the music room during lunch, grabbed my sax, and headed down the stairs outside the music room to the basement area. The music department's storage rooms were down there, and they always gave me an eerie feeling. The hallway was long and lined with storage rooms, small, windowless spaces about 7 by 7 feet. They were packed with chairs, music stands, spare instruments, Christmas decorations, and whatever else the school dumped down there. The lighting was terrible. Dim bulbs flickered against the pale walls, casting strange shadows. It was always dead silent down there, and the only people who ever really went into that area were the music teachers. I found an empty storage room, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me. Just in case Mr. Nicholson came down to check on me, I propped up my music on a stand, making it look like I was practicing. Then I sat down and pulled out my phone, fully intending to waste the entire period. And that's when everything changed. Without warning, the room was plunged into complete darkness. Not dim, not flickering, pitch black. Even my phone screen seemed to struggle against the darkness. My stomach twisted as I instinctively flicked the light switch on and off, but nothing happened. A power outage? Maybe. I stood up, fumbling for the door. But when I opened it, I found the hallway was just as dark. The dim bulbs that usually lit the corridor were all out. I raised my phone in front of me for light. Not much, but enough to barely illuminate the hallway. Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the storage room doors at the far end of the hall was slowly creaking open. I froze, heart pounding. A dragging sound echoed down the hallway, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It sounded like one of those large plastic storage bins scraping against the tiles. Then, I heard it. Manic breathing, shaky, uneven, followed by a low, guttural grunting, something animalistic. The bin slid further into the hallway, as if someone, or something, was pushing it out of the room. Panic shot through me. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I turned off my phone screen and backed into the storage room, shutting the door as quietly as I could. My heart hammered in my chest as I stood there in the dark, barely breathing. I had no idea what to do. The stairs leading up were blocked by whoever, or whatever, was in that hallway, and of course my phone had no reception in the basement. I waited, hoping the lights would come back on, hoping that maybe it was just a janitor moving equipment. But then I heard something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. I cracked the door open just a sliver, holding my phone in front of me for light. I inched forward, carefully stepping into the hall. Maybe if I moved quickly and quietly, I could slip past whoever was there and get to the stairs. Then, another sound. I ducked into the nearest open storage room and shut the door. I stood there, paralyzed. My breath was shallow, my hands shaking. The only thing I could hear was the rapid pounding of my heart. And then, I felt it, that indescribable feeling of not being alone. Even though I couldn't hear anything, I knew someone was in the room with me. I swallowed hard and hesitated before lifting my trembling hand to my phone. I pressed the home button. The screen lit up for just a half second, and in that half second, I saw him, a man, standing in the corner of the tiny storage room just a few feet away from me. I barely had time to react before he broke the silence. He exhaled a heavy, rattling breath, then a hand patted my shoulder twice, and then it started squeezing. I didn't scream, I couldn't. I just lunged for the door, hands shaking so badly I couldn't find the doorknob at first. The man behind me pushed against the door trying to hold it shut, but I threw my entire weight against it. It popped open, and I stumbled into the hallway, running blindly toward the stairs. I never looked back. I bolted up the steps, through the door, and into the brightly lit music hall. The lights were still on. Everything looked normal. I sprinted straight to Mr. Nicholson's office, panting, trying to catch my breath as I spilled out everything I had just seen. He immediately called security. They went down to the basement to check. When they came back up, they told us no one was there, but things had been moved around. Storage bins were left in the hallway. Equipment had been rearranged. There were no cameras in the music hall, so there was no way to prove that someone had been down there with me. The next day, I was called into the dean's office to give my report, but after that nothing happened. No arrests, no explanations, no answers. All I know is that someone was down there. They cut the power, they moved things around, and they were in the room with me, waiting in the dark. One night, my friends and I came up with what we thought was a genius plan, sneaking into the high school basement through a broken window that had never been fixed. The only catch? The window was behind a short metal gate that surrounded the basement staircase. Not that it would stop anyone, but it gave the whole thing an extra layer of excitement, making us feel like we were doing something really rebellious. We made sure no security cars were nearby before hopping the gate. Getting through the window was the tricky part. We had to boost ourselves up and squeeze through an opening barely big enough to fit. But once we were in, we were in. We scattered, each exploring different areas of the basement. The first thing I noticed, the basement was an absolute mess. Dusty chairs, forgotten desks, old textbooks, and random broken furniture were scattered around. It was dimly lit. One small white light flickered in a far corner, and the red glow of the exit sign was surprisingly bright. Not exactly the horror movie setting we had expected. I was looking around when I saw one of my friends standing in front of me. He whispered, "Let's go upstairs." I nodded and followed him. He led me up a staircase and pushed open the door to the main hallway of the school. Everything was dark. I always assumed the school left at least some lights on at night, but no, not a single one. The only thing visible in the pitch-black hallways were the glowing red exit signs. I followed my friend deeper into the school, whispering, "Dude, this is really creepy." He mumbled something back, but it was hard to make out. That's when it hit me. Who knew if we were really alone in the building? I kept following him as he led me to the bathroom. He walked into a stall without a word. I leaned against the sink and whispered, "Hurry up." He didn't respond. I sighed, pulling out my phone to pass the time. That's when my screen lit up with an incoming call. It was Chris. I picked up. "Hello? Where the hell did you go?" he asked. I frowned. "I'm upstairs with either Roland or Brandon." There was a pause. Then Chris said, "What do you mean? They're with me." My stomach dropped. I heard both Brandon and Roland say, "Yeah, dude, we're here." My throat went dry. I turned slowly toward the stall. The air suddenly felt heavier, and then I heard it, a laugh, not from my friends. It was coming from inside the stall. It was quiet, breathy, almost playful. I hesitated for a split second before my instincts took over. I slowly looked up, and there, staring down at me from over the stall door, was a face, a stranger. Someone was standing on the toilet, looking at me. I screamed. I don't even remember what I yelled, but my phone was still in my hand, and I could hear my friends shouting through the speaker. I bolted for the door, my heart slamming against my ribs. As soon as I was out, I heard the stall door slam shut behind me. I didn't look back. I ran blindly through the dark halls, trying to retrace my steps to the basement. Everything looked different in the darkness, and I was terrified I had taken a wrong turn. But then, voices. I heard my friends calling my name from below. I found the staircase, practically jumped down the steps and burst into the basement screaming, "Go! Go!" One by one, we scrambled onto a bucket, pulled ourselves up to the window ledge, and squeezed outside. I was the first one out, too afraid to check if the person from the bathroom was following. Once we were all outside, I finally caught my breath and explained what had happened, laughing, now that I was safely surrounded by my friends. But just as we started to relax, we heard something. A sound, a faint tap. We turned back to look at the school. That's when we saw it. In one of the downstairs windows, someone was standing there, hands pressed against the glass. Their face was partially visible, just barely illuminated by the glow of the exit sign. My stomach twisted. "That's him." Roland grabbed my arm. "We need to get the hell out of here." And we ran. We ran until we were off school grounds, panting, barely able to process what had just happened. We came up with a lot of possible explanations. Maybe it was a janitor, a homeless person, or just some other kid who had sneak in like us. But none of the explanations made sense. Who was that? Why was he in the stall, waiting? And most importantly, how long had he been watching me before I noticed? One thing was for sure, we never went back.